Former Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who served under President Donald Trump, has proposed a universal tariff on U.S. imports, starting at 2.5% and increasing monthly, potentially reaching 20%. This gradual implementation aims to allow businesses and trade partners time to adjust. However, Trump has signaled a preference for even higher tariffs, particularly targeting imported semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and computer chips. Since taking office on January 20, 2025, President Trump has swiftly imposed tariffs on major U.S. trade partners, notably Canada, Mexico, and China. On Inauguration Day, he enacted a 25% tariff on all imports from Canada and Mexico, with an additional tariff on oil imports under consideration. These measures, according to Trump, are intended to curb illegal immigration, drug trafficking, and trade imbalances. Canada has strongly opposed these tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has warned of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, ensuring no single Canadian region bears the brunt. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has proposed halting electricity exports to U.S. states such as Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. A KPMG survey indicates that 81% of Canadian business leaders are willing to endure short-term hardships to secure a fair trade agreement. Trump has downplayed Canada's economic importance, stating that the U.S. does not rely on Canadian cars, lumber, or energy. He also suggested that Canada's reliance on U.S. military protection effectively subsidizes its economy. In a controversial remark, Trump even floated the idea of Canada becoming the 51st U.S. state to resolve trade disputes. Trudeau, in response, has asserted that all options remain on the table, including potential energy export restrictions. Beyond counter-tariffs, Canada is working with international partners, including the EU, the UK, and Mexico, to form a united front against U.S. trade policies. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly has held discussions with European and British officials to coordinate a response. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has also condemned the tariffs, arguing they will not effectively address immigration or drug trafficking and may strain diplomatic relations. Meanwhile, Trump has announced a 10% tariff on all imports from China, citing its role in fentanyl production. This measure, set to take effect on February 1, 2025, has prompted China to advocate for diplomatic negotiations to resolve trade tensions. Trump has also warned the European Union that it could face tariffs unless it increases its purchases of American oil and gas. Additionally, he has renewed interest in acquiring Greenland, suggesting the use of military force if necessary. In response, Denmark has strengthened alliances within Europe and invested $2.1 billion in military assets, including Arctic naval vessels and surveillance technology, to reinforce its sovereignty over Greenland. The EU is already grappling with an energy crisis exacerbated by U.S. sanctions on Russian oil, rising energy costs, and internal political pressure. In anticipation of further U.S. tariffs, the EU has accelerated efforts to diversify its trade partnerships. A newly finalized free trade agreement with Mexico aims to reduce dependence on the U.S., eliminate tariffs on key agricultural products, and improve access to government contracts and investment opportunities. These strategic shifts reflect a broader global realignment as the world prepares for the economic implications of a second Trump presidency. Critics argue that the influx of South American agricultural products could undermine European farmers and raise concerns about environmental standards. French President Emmanuel Macron has expressed strong reservations, calling for additional safeguards and sustainable commitments. For the agreement to take effect, it must be ratified by all 27 EU member states and approved by the European Parliament. Given the existing opposition, particularly from countries with significant agricultural sectors, the ratification process may face obstacles and could take several years. After World War II, the United States played a crucial role in shaping its relationship with what would later become the European Union. The Marshall Plan, launched in 1948, was instrumental in rebuilding war-torn European nations, stabilizing their economies, and promoting regional cooperation. The U.S. also supported the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC, in 1951, seeing it as a way to prevent future conflicts between France and Germany by integrating key industries. In 1954, the EU's predecessor established its delegation in Washington, D.C., to manage growing economic ties. This relationship deepened further in 1961 with the creation of the United States mission to the European communities in Brussels, symbolizing a mutual commitment to political and economic cooperation. Following World War II, the United States emerged as a global leader, actively shaping the post-war international order. Recognizing the growing Soviet threat, the U.S. took decisive steps to contain its expansion and promote democratic values. In 1949, NATO was established in response to the Soviet Union's increasing influence in Eastern Europe and actions like the Berlin blockade. The U.S. played a key role, not only as a financial supporter but also as a military ally, stationing troops in Europe and appointing General Dwight D. Eisenhower as NATO's first supreme commander. In 1947, President Harry S. Truman introduced the Truman Doctrine, marking a major shift in U.S. foreign policy. The doctrine declared that the U.S. would support free nations resisting subjugation by armed minorities or external pressures, specifically targeting the spread of communism. Initially, it provided significant economic and military aid to Greece and Turkey to prevent them from falling under Soviet influence, laying the foundation for the U.S. containment strategy throughout the Cold War. Complementing these efforts, the U.S. launched the Marshall Plan in 1948, a massive economic aid program aimed at rebuilding Europe. By revitalizing European economies, the plan sought to create stable conditions for democratic institutions to thrive, reducing the appeal of communist ideologies. Its success further aligned Europe with American policies during the early Cold War. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, strengthened military cooperation between the U.S. and its European allies within NATO, highlighting the perceived threat of communist expansion. In response, NATO established the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, in 1951, with General Eisenhower as its first Supreme Allied commander. However, the Suez Crisis of 1956 exposed tensions within the alliance. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, the UK, France, and Israel launched a military intervention to regain control. The U.S., under President Eisenhower, opposed this action, fearing it would destabilize the region and push Arab nations toward the Soviet sphere of influence. Consequently, the U.S. applied diplomatic and economic pressure on its European allies to withdraw, revealing differing interests and signaling a move toward more independent European foreign policy initiatives. The Berlin Crisis of 1961 was a defining moment in the Cold War, significantly impacting U.S.-EU relations. In June 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev met with U.S. President John F. Kennedy and demanded the withdrawal of Allied forces from West Berlin, threatening to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany. This move would have ended the existing four-power agreements that guaranteed American, British, and French access to West Berlin. In response, the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to West Berlin, with Kennedy increasing the Army's total authorized strength and doubling draft calls to demonstrate a firm stance against Soviet pressure. The crisis underscored NATO's importance as a stabilizing force in Europe, reinforcing Western unity and demonstrating the U.S. commitment to European security. Throughout this period, the U.S. continued supporting European integration, seeing a united and economically strong Europe as a barrier against communist expansion. This was evident in its backing of initiatives like the European Economic Community, which fostered closer economic and political ties among Western European nations. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, became a major point of contention between the U.S. and its European allies. While the U.S. escalated its military involvement in Southeast Asia, many European nations hesitated to offer support. France, in particular, strongly opposed U.S. intervention, influenced by its own colonial history in Indochina and a desire to distance itself from American foreign policy decisions. The UK and West Germany showed varying degrees of public support but refrained from committing troops, highlighting the complex and divided European responses to the conflict. Economic tensions also emerged during this period, especially regarding monetary policies. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s led to significant exchange rate volatility, negatively impacting European economies. In response, European leaders sought to reduce their dependence on the US dollar and enhance monetary stability. This effort culminated in the establishment of the European Monetary System, EMS, in March 1979, spearheaded by European Commission President Roy Jenkins. The EMS aimed to foster closer monetary policy cooperation among European Economic Community member states by linking their currencies to prevent large fluctuations. Key components included the European Currency Unit, ECU, a basket of member currencies, and the Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM, which set exchange rate margins and required interventions when deviations exceeded agreed limits. During the Reagan administration, both Europe and the US focused on economic liberalization and free market policies, aligning with Europe's push for a single market under the Single European Act of 1986. Despite this alignment, trade disputes arose, particularly over agricultural subsidies under the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a pivotal shift in global dynamics, prompting the US and the EU to realign their relationship toward economic collaboration and peacekeeping efforts. This transition was formalized through key agreements expanding transatlantic cooperation. In November 1990, the Transatlantic Declaration was adopted, establishing a structured framework for political dialogue between the European Community and the US. It emphasized shared values like democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, laying the groundwork for regular consultations on economic and political matters. Building on this, the new Transatlantic Agenda, NTA, was launched in December 1995 during the EU-US Summit in Madrid. It outlined 4 broad objectives: promoting peace, democracy, and development, addressing global challenges such as environmental issues and terrorism, expanding world trade and economic relations, and fostering educational and cultural exchanges. This agenda marked a significant step in strengthening EU-US relations, moving from consultations to coordinated joint actions. The escalating trade conflict between the US and nations affected by its tariff policies, including the EU, Canada, Mexico, and China, could have widespread repercussions. A unified response from these countries would pose a significant threat to the US economy, given its heavy reliance on imported goods. Retaliatory tariffs or trade barriers could disrupt the US market, increase inflation, and add financial strain on American consumers. Targeting critical sectors like technology, automotive, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture, such measures would raise production costs, reduce US competitiveness, and further strain consumers already facing rising costs. Major trading partners like China, Canada, and the EU could leverage their economic strength to redirect trade flows, reducing dependence on US goods and technologies. The EU might intensify efforts to diversify trade and enhance strategic autonomy, while Canada and Mexico could leverage their roles in North American supply chains to negotiate fairer trade terms. China, as a leading global exporter, could further isolate the US by strengthening trade relations with other economies.